Okay, so welcome to the FC podcast. We are excited to partner with the FIFA Master Alumni Association to develop season one of the podcast, which involves interviews with some of the top graduates of the FIFA Master from the Asia Oceania region. We'll bring you some exclusive insights from some of the brightest minds in the world of sports business, the challenges they face, how they go about their business on a day-to-day basis, and some key learnings for you as we move forward into the 21st century of world sport. So it is my absolute pleasure today to welcome Miss Shoko Tsuji, who's a player relations manager at FIFPRO. Shoko, I'm going to read her bio. It's an amazing one, so apologies for reading directly from the screen, but Shoko is a multilingual professional with more than a decade of experience working for international football organizations across Europe and Asia. She started a career in Spain, where she coordinated live broadcasts, interviewed football players, and produced documentaries for the official broadcaster of La Liga. Following that, she completed the FIFA Master and joined football tech company MyCuju, where she was responsible for implementing live streaming in over 100 member associations and leagues around the world, primarily in Asia. 2 years ago, she joined FIFPRO, the global union representing professional football players worldwide, as its first ever Asian employee. Shoko is passionate about increasing Asian representation in international football governance and is the proud co-founder of Sport Global, a one-stop platform that inspires, informs, and empowers Japanese students and professionals to pursue an education or career in sports overseas. Wow, that's a pretty decent CV, I must say, Shoko. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us. Before we get started, everyone that joins the podcast needs to tell us your name, which I've already read out, of course, your nationality, what edition of the FIFA Master you studied, and also who's your favorite sports team. Doesn't need to be a football team, but who's your favorite sports team? So over to you.
Hi, James. No, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So where are you from?
I'm from Japan.
And FIFA
I'm
Master edition? Yeah.
17th edition, so 2016 to 2017.
And your favorite sports team?
My favorite sports team is Yokohama F. Marinos. I've been a fan since, I moved to Yokohama back in 1998, and I followed them since.
Wow. So you would have been pretty pleased with Big Ange Postecoglou leading you to a title a couple of years ago. Sorry,
Yeah,
get the Aussie angle in there.
yeah, and Kevin Musk, of course, and now we have Harry Kewell. So, it's been really exciting.
So you're definitely used to my accent, and you're reaching us from Amsterdam in the Netherlands today. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm based in Amsterdam right now.
Great. So, I read out some of your stops along the way in terms of your career. Obviously, you're in Amsterdam working for FIFPRO, the World Players Union, but maybe could you take us and the listeners through a little bit of your career from the start and those stops with a bit more detail to where we are now?
Yeah, of course. Well, I grew up in Japan. I spent my childhood in Amsterdam, so I lived here for 4 years. Growing up, I as I told you earlier, I was a huge Marinos fan. And I knew from an early age I wanted to work in football one day, but I just didn't know how. I was always really interested in languages, and I grew up learning Spanish. So I think when I completed my studies, I knew pretty clearly that I wanted to pursue a master's degree in Spain, which I did. I did a sports journalism master in Madrid for a year. And I thought I would go back to Japan to find a job there, but luckily I was able to find a job in Barcelona. So that was my first job in sport, working for an agency in Barcelona that was responsible for coordinating the live broadcast of La Liga. I was also tasked with doing interviews with players and managers in Spain, working on a few documentaries as well.
In Spanish language interviews as well?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it was good that I had done a bit of Spanish in Japan because I definitely did. Yeah, I had I would say I had like maybe an intermediate level when I moved to Spain. And then obviously doing the master's program in Spanish, I had to do commentary, do interviews, and that helped me brush up my Spanish. So that came in really handy when I got my first job in Spain.
Amazing. And so then after Spain, you did the FIFA Master, is that right? Or is there a stock in the middle?
Yeah, exactly. So I actually found out about the FIFA Master when I was doing I was in university in Japan. My professor at the time, he did his sabbatical at De Montfort University. So he found out about the FIFA Master. He recommended it to me. But after speaking to a few alumni, I was advised to work a bit and then do the FIFA Master, which is what I did. And during my time in Spain, I also had the opportunity to work with Tsuneyasu Miyamoto, former captain of the Japan national team, who had just completed his FIFA Master. And when I spoke to him about it, he said it was one of the best decisions he'd ever made, that the 1 year he spent at the FIFA Master was just as important and life-changing as his 17-year career. So I knew that I wanted to do it. I was just looking for the right timing. And after 5 years in Spain, it seemed like the right moment.
Yeah, Sun is known to both of us. He's about to be appointed and elected the president of the Japanese Football Association, isn't he? So yeah, that's a nice contact for you to have, no doubt. So after the FIFA Master, where did your career take you, where you ended up in calling me from Amsterdam and chatting about your life and career in sport?
Yeah, so already when I was in Spain, I could feel the shift from traditional broadcasting to live streaming. So I knew that if I wanted to stay in the media space, I would also need to make that transition to the more digital space. And upon completing the FIFA Master, I found a live streaming football tech startup called Maikuju, which was actually founded by a FIFA Master alumnus called Pedro Preza. We had a chat. He told me that they had just signed a partnership with the AFC, the Asian Football Confederation, and that they were looking for someone to be based in Asia to run that project. And I joined in 2017. I was there for 4 years. During the first half of those 4 years, I was based in Singapore, but traveling a lot all over Asia, implementing live streaming in the different member associations. I think that's also when we met quite a lot, James, in different countries in Asia. And it was really, I learned so much during those 4 years because we were a small team. We were there to conquer the world. And it was just really nice to see how from just a few streams that started in Switzerland, we were able to reach 6 confederations and partnerships with leagues, federations, and over 100 countries around the world.
Before I ask you then about the move from Maikuju to FIFPRO, as you just mentioned, you and I have met each other I can think in Malaysia, Singapore, Qatar, UAE, Australia, UK, lots of places. Only one missing is Japan. But my question for you is you've lived in so many different countries and worked with so many people from different cultures. How do you adapt to that, where you might be working, say, with people from a more Western transactional mentality, or your HQ is based in Europe, and those are your people talking to you about that, versus maybe your clients are more of a typical Asian style, you need to develop relationships before work can get done, or you have all the different types of mixes that you find, particularly in the Asia Pacific region, of different cultures, different religions, different socio-demographic backgrounds, different economics across those parts of the world, but everyone's still playing and loving football. It's when you put the ball on the field, it's objectively 11 versus 11, right? How do you balance all of that? Obviously, you are Mrs. International. You've got all the experience across the world, but from you, how have you adapted to that, and how do you adapt that into your working style?
No, that's a really good question. And to be honest, I still haven't figured it out. I'm learning every day. But I think one thing that I've always tried to do is prepare a lot in advance. I think that probably comes from my background being a journalist. And I was always told by my mentor that before meeting someone, try to read 3 books about that person, which isn't always possible, but whatever there is online, or just see what they've spoken about in previous interviews, read about their culture, read about how the national team did in the last window, anything that can start a conversation. And I think the more you're informed, then the more you're able to also show that you value their time, you respect them. And I think that's something that has always worked wherever I've traveled. So that's something I really try to do every time I meet someone. And then I also really try to, if possible, learn the language or at least a few phrases, because I think that's what helped me a lot when I moved to Spain, already knowing the language, because for me, learning a language is also learning the culture of a country. You can see from the words they have, the phrases they have, how they think and how they behave. So that goes a long way. So if I were to share 2 tips, I guess, those would be the 2 tips. But Asia is so diverse, as you know. So I wouldn't say I'm there yet. I'm still learning. I'm still going on the journey.
Great. And that brings you to FIFPRO, because maybe we'll skip how you got to FIFPRO, because I'd love to talk about your work directly, because you, as a player relations manager, the first person from an Asian background hired by FIFPRO, that's a big step. And FIFPRO obviously has a reasonable presence in the Asia Oceania region with its player unions. But tell us, what you do at FIFPRO. What does your day-to-day look like, and what drives you?
Yeah, I'm responsible for player relations at FIFPRO, which, interestingly enough, even though it is a union that represents professional players, this role is new. So it was created when I joined, and it came from the acknowledgement, the need for FIFPRO to really get feedback more faster from players on international topics. I think especially with what happened with the Super League and a lot of the discussions now around the international match calendar. Obviously, through our unions, we can reach a lot of players and talk to them about domestic issues. But when it comes to international issues, it's really important for us to also have a group of players that we can always engage with directly. So my role, I think there's no such thing as a typical week or a typical day at FIFPRO. It really changes, but I travel quite a lot. I go to different tournaments to speak to national team players, just understand the conditions they're experiencing and the issues that they're experiencing. Nothing beats jumping on a call with players. I think that's what helps our work the most, just getting feedback from the players on if what we're doing is relevant for them or if there's anything we're missing. But we also have a lot of initiatives to involve players. So I work across different departments at FIFPRO, so working closely with comms to see if there's a campaign we're pushing out, which player would be the best to speak about it, how can we prepare them to feel confident speaking about the topic. When we have events, we definitely try to bring more players so that we have players represented on the different panels. And also when we think about shaping policies or writing new guidelines, we make sure that we speak to active players, not retired players, active players, so that we can make sure their feedback is included. So it's very flexible. It's very fluid. I'm still shaping it. I'm still in my 2nd year, but I think the most important thing is that we ensure that players are represented and included in all of our processes and projects.
Sounds amazing. Now, I'm going to disclose a little bit of information here. You and I did catch up at the Women's World Cup, both in Auckland and in Sydney. I would be really interested in understanding from a leadership perspective, when you're dealing with players, the differences between dealing with, say, male professional players and female professional players, or even within the women's game where you have such a wide range of players at the same competition. At the Women's World Cup, you had some of the highest paid women's players in the world, and then you had some purely amateur players who play for the love of the game. How do you, as someone who is responsible for liaising with those players, how do you address those differences?
Yeah, I think what the biggest difference I see is that women's players, there's this huge feeling of solidarity between them, regardless of whether they're playing in the most elite leagues or if they're not, if they don't have the most professional conditions. And I think it comes from the fact that all of them a few years ago were playing in pretty amateur conditions. So they all know what it feels like. And they also know that the game is not where it needs to be, even though I must acknowledge all the developments that have been made in women's football until now. But there's still a huge difference between, for example, FIFA organized competitions and other competitions. And then when you go outside the major competitions on a day-to-day basis in the domestic leagues, there's still a lot of improvement. So we have so many players from different national teams. When they see an issue happening in a specific country, they reach out to us saying, how can we help, or how can we use our voice, or how can we use our platform to support this team? And this happens. I've already seen it so many times in the 2 years I've been at FIFPRO, and I think it's amazing that they really feel that like they're united. Unfortunately, I don't see that so much in the men's game. I think there are many reasons. The game is also a lot more developed, and I think the issues that they face are different. But I think the nature of the issues are I think, for example, one issue that unites the players on the women's game is conditions. But on the men's game, it's more, I feel like, the calendar workload. That's something that a lot of players experience. And then there are a bit more individual ones. But I think those are probably the biggest differences I see.
Great. And in terms of addressing that, how do you have to adapt your style then? Or is it the same for everybody, regardless of who they are?
Yeah, no, I think where I adapt myself the most is depending on like different cultures, because there are regions which have lots of activists, players who are used to speaking out, and they're not scared to, because it's always been part of their national team culture. For example, like the US women's national team is a good example of that. In a lot of the Western European countries, you see them like always using their platforms and their voices to speak up. But when we're speaking about Asia, for example, which has a very strong anti-unionist culture, when I first joined, I found it quite hard to involve players from Asia. But I think I've tried to find ways for them to feel comfortable. So just making them know that, for example, it's not just them talking about this issue. It's 100 other players, or also bringing the federations and leagues along so that they don't feel scared and it doesn't sound like they're attacking their federations, or also bringing data so that they can speak to the numbers instead of it's sounding like something personal. So I think that's where I need to adapt and be a bit more creative and think outside the box to make sure that they feel comfortable, because we do need the voices of the players. Like, there's nothing more powerful than getting a player to speak, but if they don't feel safe, or if they're going to have to deal with the consequences, we don't want to harm their careers either. And unfortunately, we've seen so many cases where players have spoken up individually and they've been removed from their national team. So that's the last thing we want.
I think that's something that a lot of people that follow football in the West or Western countries maybe don't understand about many of the strong football cultures around the world, in terms of the concept of a union or an association representing employees is either illegal, taboo, or not culturally accepted. And, even if you are the most famous player in that country, you risk your career just simply requesting a raise in standards or a change in approach. It's a fascinating one, which maybe that parlays actually into the next topic, which is international football governance, something which I know you are absolutely, I can see the smile, you're absolutely passionate about, and particularly passionate about Asian representation in international football governance. But let's maybe talk first from a FIFPRO perspective, because in my former role at FIFA, I also dealt with FIFPRO as a stakeholder, involved in the international football transfer system. So maybe how does FIFPRO, if you can, see itself in terms of that international football governance framework from a stakeholder perspective?
Yeah, well, FIFPRO is the only organization in the world that represents professional football players worldwide. So we represent the interests of players, and that's why it's really important for us to be at the table, especially in this age when players their voices are becoming more and more powerful. And in the end, football, the games wouldn't happen without the players if they didn't want to play. So it's really important that FIFPRO is at the table, is in the rooms where the decisions are being made, so that we can speak on behalf of them.
Great. And so personal perspective, international football governance and particularly Asian representation in international football governance. Talk to me about that kind of passion, because, governance is a topic which either somebody loves or they hate or whatnot. And you obviously have a big passion for it. So tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think even during the FIFA Master, I don't know if it was the same for you, James, but there were so many guest speakers coming saying, "Oh, the future is Asia, the future is Asia," and I really believe it. And I mean, even if you just take the world's population, like 60% of the world is Asia. You look at the Olympic partners, FIFA partners, like a lot of them come from Asia. A lot of the broadcast fees come from Asia, so it's really a region you just can't ignore. But then on the other side, when you look at the people working at the international sport governing bodies and those in the boardrooms, I feel there's a huge underrepresentation. I think I recently read something, a study from maybe 3 years ago, that of the 400 plus board members in international sport bodies, I think only 5 of them were Asian women, which, so I imagine it would also apply to Asian men as well. But and not many people are talking about it, I feel. I've done a bit of research on whether there's any literature available, but I feel that Asians are also often seen as the model minority, because even though I think there's a lot of talent in Asia, a lot of people who come from who had really high education and they've accomplished amazing things. Guess we also kind of accept the situation. We don't speak so much about underrepresentation, even though it is so visible. So I feel there are a lot of factors in play. The visa situation is definitely one, but also just the perception of Asians. And I do think there's a lot we can do to change that, because even at FIFPRO, I'm always making sure that I include more Asian players, or we talk about the Asian Cup, or we do surveys around the Asian Cup, because unfortunately the reality is that a lot of the football governance landscape is very Eurocentric, and many decisions are made based on what's happening in Europe.
Yeah, you and I both share that last view in particular about the Eurocentricity of football and global sport. And I think something that a lot of people tend to forget is that a significant chunk of the money in global football actually comes from Asian sources and leaves Asia and goes into Europe. And that's something I think which, when we do a deep dive one day into international football governance, will definitely be a big part of that one. Before we go sort of towards our conclusion, and I'm going to ask you to explain to us some of your sort of big challenges and what you envision for the future. Let's talk a little bit about Sport Global, because this is something that I learned about you in the research for this, because I kind of knew, but I didn't know. And so that sounds really cool. Tell us more about this business you co-founded.
Yeah, it's a side project, a passion project that I started during the pandemic when I had a lot of free time to myself, and I chatted with 2 friends, Masa and Hiro, who both work at the AFC, because between the 3 of us, we were always talking about how we wanted to help more Japanese professionals and students work or study and sport overseas. So when you look online, there are different blogs. There are people who've tweeted about their experiences, but the information isn't really consolidated, or at least it wasn't back in 2020. So we thought it would be nice if we just created a website where we could feature different master's programs overseas, different events, like sport networking events, but also showcase different Japanese professionals who've worked or studied overseas. Because when I look back at when I was a student, I always had this dream of working overseas in an international sport organization, but I had no role models, I had no one to speak to, and there was no information. So I kind of had to figure it out on my own. But I think if we want to help more people, not just Japanese professionals, but Asian professionals, get into the international sport landscape, I think, the more guidance we can offer, better. So that's what we're doing. On top of publishing articles, we also have a podcast. But we also offer free consulting sessions where we just jump on a call with people who've reached out and try to help them as much as we can. We also help them draft their CVs because it's quite different. Like the typical CV you would write in Japan compared to what international organizations want.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much it.
Giving back to the future of Japanese sport. That's really cool. Look, any Japanese people that are watching this right now, or those that can read Japanese, give your website a plug. What's the website for the company?
It's sportglobal.jp.
Easy. That's an easy one. So hopefully after this is published, it's published now at the end of February. What's recorded at the end of February in 24. Let's see when we publish it if there's a nice little spike in visits to the website. Look, we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left, so let's talk about what you find. A couple of things. First is in your role and in sports in general, what do you think are the biggest challenges that you face and that sports face right now?
I think the biggest challenge I feel is what I mentioned already, just the lack of representation in international sport organizations. I'm not just speaking about Asians, but in general, I think it's hugely dominated by white male professionals. So that's probably the biggest challenge. And then in my role, I think it's just identifying the biggest issues that players face, because there's so many issues from social media abuse to workload to finding a career after sports, for example. And just trying to find the balance between, tackling our global issues, but making sure we're also relevant for the non-national team players, playing in their domestic leagues, and making sure that we're also, serving our member unions, because in the end, we wouldn't exist without them. So we're a small team at FIFPRO, so I think it's really important that we find the right balance, and we know that we prioritize the issues that have the biggest impact.
Great. Let's talk about that first one then, about the biggest challenge in terms of diversity. Do you have any proposals or solutions how we can fix that? Or do you have any thoughts on maybe practices we can borrow from the corporate world?
Well, at FIFPRO, we also have an AGI task force. So we've been on a journey ourselves to educate ourselves on, why is diversity important in the first place? And I think that is lacking in general. I think a lot of people just see it as a tick box exercise. So if there's a woman, that's a check, without really understanding why it's important. There's so many studies about how diverse organizations are more profitable. You just have so many more ideas than you, rather than having people who come from the same background, having diverse opinions. It really helps to make an organization grow in the long term. So I think first that education needs to be in place. But I think also just, making things more transparent. So if we could see what the breakdown is of the different nationalities in different organizations, how football organizations compared to other sport organizations, or even compared to the UN or the WHO, I think having, just seeing that first, that would be a good starting point. And then there are other actions that can be made. But we can revise recruitment processes. There's a lot that still can be done.
No, I think you touched on something really interesting there about the nationalities within sports organizations. And, we've shared before how frustrated I was in my former role about the inability I had to hire on a more global basis just because of visa restrictions in Central Europe, and how that potentially means you lose some of the best minds, whether they might be Japanese, Chinese, Australian, Brazilian, Paraguayan, Mongolian, Ethiopian, or whatever, as opposed to just being from Central Europe. So that's great. Thank you. And then I guess to finish off, future trends. So where do you see sports going? What are the things that you're seeing now that we'll all be talking about in 3 years' time as the now? You mentioned before, the future is Asia. That was the tagline of the AFC for a very long time. And then we're meant to be in the now right now, but what do you see as the future trends in sport, and what we'll be talking about in a couple of years' time?
Yeah, definitely more sports tech will continue to grow. I mean, live streaming was pretty like innovative when I finished the FIFA Master, but now it's everywhere. I think people just prefer to watch their matches on their mobile devices, and that's something that will continue to grow. That maybe sports and AI, we're already seeing it, but I think we'll see more of those solutions. Second point, yeah, women's sport, women's football. We've seen how successful the previous Women's World Cup was. But already in France, I think we saw a lot of potential. It's going to continue to grow. There's more investment, more fans across all ages, across all genders. So I'm really optimistic about the future of women's football. And yeah, I'm really optimistic also about the future of Asia. We see more events moving there, a lot of people moving to Asia to work in agencies and federations and companies there, more investment. And I think we both saw at the Asian Cup that it's getting so much more competitive. You really just don't know who will win these competitions. So I would stick with these 3 points.
Great. And I'm going to touch on one of them to the last very end, women's football. Speak a bit more about the challenges and opportunities that we see. Obviously, we had the Women's World Cup in the Asia Pacific region last year.
Yeah.
And that was mooted by everyone as the greatest Women's World Cup of all time. And it created this groundswell of support across the world that maybe didn't necessarily exist previously. But tell us about where you see the challenges and opportunities in women's football specifically.
Yeah, I think we need to make sure that what happened at the Women's World Cup isn't just something that happens once every 4 years. Already, for example, if we speak about this window in the Olympic qualifiers, we're seeing things that shouldn't be happening. The Japanese women's national team, they're playing against DPR Korea tomorrow in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, but the venue was only confirmed 4 days before the match was supposed to happen because of DPR Korea not being able to host. So that meant the players having to fly to Japan without knowing, and then having to fly back to Jeddah. And then now, next week they'll have to go back to Japan to play. So I think when we remove like the FIFA bubble, there's still a lot, even at national team level in terms of conditions, how the players are treated, the nutrition they get, the stuff they get provided, that needs to be improved. So I really think, the opportunities are there because the visibility is increasing. Players are feeling more empowered to speak up about these issues. But the challenges are still there, especially in terms of conditions.
From challenge, opportunity beckons. So hopefully that we can see over the next half a decade or so that those challenges are removed or reduced as far as possible. Well, Shoko, thank you so much for giving us your time this morning in Amsterdam, or this afternoon, I should say. It's probably just gone close to midday over there.
Yeah.
It's an absolute pleasure for us, and we're really grateful for your time and for everything you've helped us with. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I always love speaking about football with you, particularly Asian football. So I really enjoyed the chat. Thanks again for the invitation.
Thanks, Shoko. We'll have to meet in Japan next time we see each other in person.
Definitely.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.